We've got Vince Bugliosi with us, the famed former L.A. prosecutor. He's telling us what went wrong, how he would have responded to the defense tactics in the so-called trial of the century. I was asking him for his reaction to the verdict, and a detailed answer. Vince is basically saying how absolutely disgusted he is with the case as presented. You want to get on to the judge, your reaction to Judge Ito, Vince, and then we'll get on specifically to what you think went wrong in the prosecution's tactics?
Well, let me say that I think this case, Geraldo, is going to have a very deleterious effect upon Americans' view of the and confidence and faith in the jury system.
I agree with you there.
Because the vast majority of Americans believe that Simpson is guilty, and they've seen where the issue of his guilt was subverted by extraneous and irrelevant issues of racism. And talking about Judge Ito, I blame Judge Ito completely for allowing race to be a big issue in this trial. He never should have allowed the defense to ask Furman whether he had ever used a racial slur in the last 10 years. Under Section 352 of the California Evidence Code, if the relevance of offered evidence is substantially outweighed by the damage to the opposing side, you exclude it. And here the relevance of Furman using a racial slur in the past 10 years was extremely remote at best. It's a non sequitur and a broad jump of Olympian proportions to conclude that just because someone's a racist, they go around framing innocent people of murder.
But isn't there a lot of case law, Vince? I don't want to interrupt you there. Isn't there a lot of case law that suggests that on areas of racial bias, the judge should give considerable latitude?
Yeah, but just using a racial slur in the past 10 years, which is all he knew at the time, it should not have been admissible because the damage to the prosecution was absolutely monumental. And I think he made a tremendous error under 352 of the Evidence Code. Now, that's the legal reason for keeping that out. I'll give you the common sense reason, Geraldo. Every single day, thousands of police officers, white police officers, arrest and investigate black suspects. Does anyone really believe when those thousands upon thousands of cases come to court, it's perfectly proper to ask every single one of those white police officers if he's ever used a racial slur, and if he denies it, and there's some evidence that he did, have a separate satellite trial on that issue. Judge Ito was way off base on this issue, as he was in so many other areas of this trial, and the prosecution had to pay for Ito's sins.
Okay, aside from the judge, what else went wrong? What went wrong specifically with the prosecution's case?
Well, two things went wrong here. Number one, Garcetti transferred the case downtown. This was not a representative jury. It should have been tried in Santa Monica, the judicial district where it happened. This jury was not a representative jury. They were extremely biased against the prosecution and in favor of Simpson. And in listening to the reasons they've given for the acquittal, they sound like they're candidates for the mental poverty program. I mean, how dare, this is a terrible jury, how dare Judge Ito mouth the words to this jury that he and society owe them a debt of gratitude. That's a verbal obscenity. He could have thanked them for their time. But to say that we owe this jury a debt of gratitude when their verdict was totally incompatible with the evidence, and they were out 3 hours deliberating over a 9-month case, it's just absurd. So the jury here was a very, very poor jury. But in addition to the jury being poor, Geraldo, I have to say that the prosecution could have done a much, much better job.
All right, let's get that. How would you have answered the frame-up theory?
Well, before we get into that, Geraldo, what about all the evidence that they didn't introduce?
Like what?
Do you want to talk about that?
Go ahead, quickly.
Do we have time to talk about that?
Well, we want to cover a lot of ground, but you can, go over it. I assume you mean the Bronco chase, some of the other
it's unbelievable, the evidence that they did not introduce. After the slow speed chase, they never introduced evidence during the trial that they found a gun, a passport, $8,000 in cash, and a cheap disguise in that Bronco. Exceedingly incriminating evidence that the DA did not introduce. Unbelievable.
Why wouldn't they put in something that every kid that ever heard of a lawyer says they should have put in?
Well, supposedly during that slow-speed chase, Simpson was saying that he was innocent. He was telling everyone he was innocent, and he was denying guilt, and the prosecution did not want the jury to hear this denial. But that's ridiculous. Of course the jury knows he denied guilt. That's why they're having a trial. If he hadn't denied guilt and had pled guilty, there would not have been a trial. They never introduced that note that he wrote, that suicide note that just absolutely reeks with guilt. Show me an innocent person who would, being charged with murder, who would write a note like that. You'd have to scour the face of the globe. Most importantly, Geraldo, they never introduced that extremely incriminating statement that Simpson made to the police the morning after the murders. I heard the entire 32-minute audio. The police asked Simpson, they told him, there's blood all over your car and home and in the driveway. How come? Now, mind you, this is a very important point. Keep this in mind. This was several hours before they withdrew any blood from his arm and would have had any opportunity to sprinkle it and plant it, which we know is pure moonshine. It never happened. But the conversation took place several hours before that. And Simpson, out of his own lips, said that he was dripping blood in his car and home that previous night. He said he was dripping blood. They asked him why. He said, I cut myself. They asked him how. These are his exact words, not a paraphrase. I don't know. Later in the interrogation, they asked him again, how did you cut yourself? His exact words, I have no idea, man. Now, stop to think about it, Geraldo. We're not talking about nicks and scratches here. We're talking about a very deep cut to his left middle finger, and he says he has absolutely no idea how he got that cut. That statement, all by itself, is extremely powerful circumstantial evidence of guilt. More importantly, what is the likelihood that Simpson innocently cut himself very, very badly on his left middle finger around the very same time that his former wife and male companion are brutally murdered? We're talking about DNA numbers here, 1 out of 1,000,000, 1 out of 100,000. And when you cut yourself, Geraldo, unless you're in a frantic, frenzied state, as Simpson obviously was in, you stop the flow of blood with your hand or your handkerchief, and you put on a bandage. You don't bleed all over the place. They didn't introduce that statement. Now, if you want to talk about the, this thing is falling out again, you want to talk about how you respond to the frame-up argument off the top of my head. I don't do anything off the top of my head, Geraldo. As Hamlet said, the readiness is all. But I'll say this, Marcia Clark, unbelievably, spent about 30 seconds telling the jury how difficult such a massive conspiracy would be. This is the type of issue which goes to the core of the defense case that you sit down with a yellow pad for at least 100 hours and you come up with 6, 7, 8 powerful arguments why it's not only difficult, but ludicrous on its face that there was a conspiracy to frame Simpson here, and you argue for at least an hour.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I won't give you 100 hours. I'll give you 2 minutes to contemplate that issue. He could have put Simpson away, he says. We'll be right back.